welcome to today's vlog. I'm delighted to welcome you. We're going to be discussing rehabilitation in the new world. I'm Laura Murphy, an associate solicitor in the personal injury team at Lead A, and I'm also joined by Bethany Sanders, a partner in the personal injury team. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speakers, Jo Evans and Sonia Campbell-Thompson from Unite Professionals, one of the leading case management companies nationally. We all represent clients who've suffered life-changing injuries, but from slightly different perspectives. It's obviously been a very strange time for everyone since lockdown began, and now that restrictions are starting to ease, we wanted to reflect, and today's vlog will be focused on the adjustments that have been required to be made to ensure our vulnerable client group has continued and will continue to receive first-class rehabilitation. Bethany, over to you to start with our first question.
Thanks, Laura. So firstly, we wanted to reflect back from our perspective, from the legal point of view, some of the challenges that our clients have faced over the last few months. And I've got some examples of particular issues that have arisen from my client's perspective. So the impact of lockdown has obviously been very significant for everyone, and in particular it's impacted on our clients who are often very vulnerable and can be isolated even outside of the lockdown circumstances. So this has made their situations even worse very often. Many clients are in need of rehabilitation at the earliest opportunity, and that's so to maximise their recoveries and give them the best opportunity to get the most out of the therapies that are on offer. Looking at rehab is certainly a priority for us, and the restrictions imposed by lockdown have meant that that's often not practicable, and we haven't been able to get that in at the earliest possible point. We've got some clients who have needed ongoing care support and therapeutic intervention, especially those that have got very serious personal care mobility needs. And the impact of COVID has been that they have got the additional anxiety of needing to allow carers and therapists into their homes, and obviously that's meant that they've got obviously, even with the increased precautions and PPE to try and minimise those risks, it's often still meant that they've found it a very difficult time and are within a very vulnerable at-risk group. So that's added to their worries. I wanted also just to flag that we have found that there are a lot of issues presented to family members from lockdown. For example, I've got a client who at the moment is in an inpatient rehab unit, and his wife used to visit him every day, and she has been very dedicated in doing so for almost 2 years now, in fact. But because of COVID, she's actually had to go 3 months without seeing him, without doing that daily visit, which has obviously been very distressing for both of them. And the role of the family member can't be forgotten in all of this, because very often they are providing a huge amount of support, encouragement, and actually helping with the carryover from the therapy that's being undertaken by the skilled therapists. For that particular client, there's also the issue of there being a very big reduction to the therapy regime that he's been having because of staffing levels at the unit, caused by people having to self-isolate, and that there not being the therapist available to provide that treatment. So on top of that, his discharge has been delayed following him contracting the virus. So there are going to be some additional rehabilitation needs that arise from the complications to his medical condition that have been caused by that condition. So just as lockdown began, I had a number of clients that were just on the cusp of starting their therapies, or had just started, and they have then been in the position where all of that's been pulled, or they haven't been able to actually do what was intended. And I wanted to give an example of a young client that I've got, a 16-year-old girl who'd been involved in a road traffic collision back in December. And she had effectively been isolated and unable to access the community easily from the point of her accident and being an inpatient in hospital. And then when she was recovering at home, she was non-weight bearing for a long time. And then just as she was at the point of actually needing to undertake her hydrotherapy and physiotherapy and psychology input, then lockdown happened, which meant that she couldn't actually do any of those things that she wanted to do and was really keen to do, and really needed. So whilst our case manager was able to get some treatment and some input to be undertaken on a remote basis, obviously this is something that we'll go on to discuss, and Joe and Sonia can give their perspective from their own therapeutic and case management backgrounds. But from our point of view, obviously it's suboptimal for them to be for our clients not to be able to access the therapies at the crucial time. And I'm obviously not a therapist myself, but we read lots of reports that talk about a rehabilitation window, and there being the best opportunity to actually maximise recovery for a particular client in that initial period. So I think clients can often feel frustrated and anxious that they may not be able to access that, and their recovery may therefore be curtailed. Obviously, rehabilitation is a very broad umbrella term, and it encompasses a lot of therapies and access to equipment, etc. But some of these are easier to find a workaround for than others, and it's clear that our clients have said that whilst they've been able to get, for example, physiotherapy exercises from YouTube, that their therapists have been able to send to them and show them, and they've been able to try and replicate that at home. It's very different to the hands-on and face-to-face therapies and that rapport and relationship with their therapist that they've been able to enjoy previously. So turning to Joe then, from your case management and occupational therapy perspective and background, what do you consider has been the biggest challenge in delivering rehab since lockdown began, and how have you been able to overcome that in your practice?
Thank you, Beth. I think you make a lot of very valid points there, and obviously we're a case management company that tend to deliver rehabilitation to that mid-range and catastrophic caseload, and so we're unused to delivering rehab remotely. But I think what Sonia and I were agreeing on when we were discussing this, and as an operational team, one of the key things was to make sure that your clients were safe in doing that. So evaluating, risk assessing each element of the process that we put in when we're delivering, also risk assessing the providers we use, making sure that those people were compliant with GDPR, with compliant with safe platforms to be using. Learning about new platforms, that's been a baptism of fire for us all, you know, which ones work, which ones are clunky, purchasing licenses as a company, making sure that we got our business continuity plan carried out very quickly, so staffing all settled. Case managers are obviously always at home, so they were settled, but making sure everybody felt connected, that they were learning, that they knew how to use platforms, that they knew about the new risk assessments, that they knew about our revised protocols within the company. So e-sign forms and things like that, and new workflows. I guess from a company perspective and case management perspective, what we wanted to do was to produce a set of processes that were efficient, effective and accomplished, because we didn't want to be engaging with previous clients that we were going to be continuing to coordinate their rehab with on platforms that were clunky or that didn't inspire any confidence between the client and ourselves. Checking what the clients wanted to use and were comfortable with using, and making sure we could comply with that. And also ensuring that, you know, family members were comfortable with that interface, because it's obviously coming into people's homes. So I think once we'd actually had those conversations as a team, we then did a lot of training with our case managers on the new risk assessment formats, on the new compliance formats, on the new platforms that we were providing, to make sure that they all were comfortable and confident with rolling that out. I suppose some of the positives that you touched on there, Beth, was that actually on a remote platform, what we found was that we could utilise services all around the country, form alliances, new maybe physiotherapy practices, occupational therapy practices, and I know Sonia's going to talk a bit more about her own experiences from a sort of coalface point of view, but we, you know, dietitians, psychologists, just making sure that their interaction with clients, the way they could deliver rehabilitation was positive, interactive and compliant, I guess, with some of the early things that we wanted to ensure. What we also noticed was that there was no clear guidance for us as a company. So the government hadn't said, this is how you have to do it, this is what you need to check, you need to ensure that you're doing it this way. So it was, and CMS UK and Babacom are now very proactive in that. But day one, there was nothing for a very long time. And we didn't want to do things, and even the Royal College of Occupational Therapists were quite slow in getting guidance out. So we wanted to make sure that we internally practiced some things. So myself and Rachel Cullier, my other operational clinical manager, completed some INAs and some virtual assessments to see what worked and what was efficient, effective, and met those compliance requirements. And then once we were happy, we met with the internal team, the operational team, to ensure all the protocols and paperwork were in place, made sure then that all the case managers were aware of that, and that we did some training to establish that behind. Then what I guess we've done is, after people have got more confident, and clients, we've set up some client feedback forms, so we've actually reviewed that process very quickly. I'm talking about doing all of this within probably 10 days of lockdown. So we were quick. And that's because we're a small, flexible company. You know, we're privately owned, so I can say, yes, go and get all of those different licenses. And I think it's important that there was a proactivity about that, but not a reactivity. That we actually took the time to practice those internal processes, sense check them with some of our more experienced case managers, and also ask the clients how they had found the process, and then have gradually developed our therapeutic alliances and made sure that they interface with our expectation of their compliances comprehensively. I hope that sort of answers your question. It's needed a lot of organisation, but because we've got systems set up within our own company, there's been ability to have lots of dialogue, and even things like just having fun things like a wellness platform to keep everybody communicating, you know, with yoga, body combat, wine and cheese evenings, is keeping everybody within the company talk about their own client experiences, what was working, what wasn't. We needed to go back to the drawing board. So the last sort of 12 weeks have probably been a very integrative time, but it was set up from that initial 10-day piece where we sort of went into our own mini lockdown to work out what would and wouldn't work because of the lack of guidance.
Thank you, Jo. That's really interesting, and it's great to hear that you were able to adapt so quickly and flexibly given the circumstances. I suppose going on to our next topic, and starting to look forward now that some of the restrictions are starting to be eased, and now we can take this time, as you've mentioned, to start to reflect on the changes that have been made, and actually whether we can take some benefits from what we've learned and actually take some of these things forward. And I suppose from my own perspective and from my clients, I've noticed that some of the remote therapies that have been delivered, it can actually be a positive experience for the clients in the sense that it can be slightly less intimidating for them. They're in their own environment, somewhere they feel comfortable, they're relaxed, they've got support maybe at home, and actually that enables them to engage with the therapies sometimes in a way that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be possible. And particularly, I've got a couple of clients having psychological therapy remotely, which I would have had concerns about given the very sensitive nature of the therapies. But actually, it's been working very successfully, and thank goodness it has been able to proceed when people need it the most. And the other point I thought going forward from the point of view of our legal cases is that we occasionally have cases where there are issues perhaps in relation to liability, which mean that funding can be an issue, and it may be we have a limited pot of money, and we sometimes have these very difficult questions about what's the priority and balancing that up. And actually, if we can take out some of the costs associated with, for example, travel and other expenses, and actually give some remote therapies, that may enable those clients to access that real priority need of therapy that they need, whereas they wouldn't otherwise have been able to. So they were a couple of potential benefits, I thought, but I'd be really interested to hear what you think the benefits going forward might be.
Well, actually, do you know what? That those resonate, I think, with Sonia, you and I, really, really strongly. I won't pretend that I wasn't quite anxious to begin with, because also we don't want to set the precedent as being remote work. We all know actually human contact for many of your clients and the clients that we're privileged to work with, and the teams we bring to them are rich in that interpersonal dynamic is key critical. But I agree with you, Beth, you can't just withdraw. There's no goodness in withdrawing. You need to keep those personalities in the rehab journey. I think the geographical location piece has been amazing, because sometimes I've often thought maybe we've been working, or one of our case managers has been working with somebody up in the Manchester, and we've got a client in Shropshire, and I thought, just wish I could just pick her up and take her down here because the fit is so good. And we've got that opportunity,
Yeah, costs are no longer prohibitive, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the role of the case manager, is to skillfully mould that relationship that's very two-dimensional on this platform, but can become more rich and familiar. And when you talk about psychology, Laura, I completely agree. I think that's a very big question. You want to make sure, and a lot of our remote INAs are very much about looking at the household setup. So we do a lot of pre sort of organisation before we actually do the assessment, so that we've got a really good understanding of that physical environment, so that when you're making your recommendations, they're not going to be sat in the middle of the lounge with the rest of the kids on the sofa listening to very personal things. Equally, what we sometimes aren't able to do when we deliver psychology is involve other family members. So this has provided an opportunity, because you'd have to go back for authorization for wife to have. So actually, sometimes it can become more 4 or 5 dimensional, and that you're bringing in other members. I think the thing Sonia and I were laughing about as well is how for the first time ever we've managed to have a surgeon sat with the client, with the case manager, with maybe the physio. You know, you're getting a full MDT.
Yeah.
And again, if the case manager could be competent in providing the platform and the organisation and the agenda, and sort of, you know, demystifying some of the concerns that the client might have, or de-escalating any anxieties. Actually, I found that we've been able to provide the client with a really good voice in that and advocate in a way that maybe all sitting around in the same physical space, the client maybe doesn't quite so at ease as being sat in their own front room.
Yeah.
So that's been a real positive. I think, as I said before, when we've done a sort of critique of our own business model, we felt quite proud of the fact that we've been robust during this, because we've been able to be flexible, and that actually this has made this remote working. I don't know how you find it, but I find it very intense.
It is quite intense. It's quite without break and draining. Yeah.
And I think what that's done is it's made us reflect on our own practice and the intensity of a therapeutic dynamic over different platforms, and making sure that the case manager is considering setting a really good structure and routine. You were talking, Beth, about it not being as intense as clients might like. Well, I would reflect that back to the case manager and say it's really important that we have a routine, that we have smart goals placed by the clinicians, that we give the clients ways of measuring their own performance, and maybe a technology platform which is exciting for them to learn, supported by those around them. And it gives them that feedback to then be able to say to the personal trainer or the OT or the psychologist, guess what, I smashed that target. I've done this, and actually they can share that resource. So I think that there have been many positives going forward that we, I guess, Sonia, we have reflected on as a company, and the case managers feedback to us regularly. And we're doing a lot of internal reflection on through, you know, peer group reviews and things like that to earn take-home messages. We're putting internal, you know, sort of newsletters to each other about our learning practice, so that those case managers who haven't had the experience yet can learn vicariously through their colleagues. And I think we need to keep talking with yourselves about what your clients' feedback is, and being receptive and responsive to that going forward.
Yeah, I certainly think that MDTs being held virtually is going to be the way forward, because if you think about the combined travel costs of all of those therapists attending and being in the same place, and also diary organisation and trying to get availability for all of those therapists to be in one place at one time is very difficult. So to doing that virtually, I found to be much better. And again, that's feedback that I've got from a lot of therapists and clients, that they've really benefited from that. And I think I was initially...
Sorry, Beth, for anyone listening who doesn't know, an MDT is a multidisciplinary team, just in case anyone was wondering.
And also, Beth, in that multidisciplinary team, I think that what's been most impressive to me, and I really didn't expect, if you did, Sonia, was that the client really comes front and central. You know, they, in a way that in a physical space, maybe you try and orchestrate that as a team, but ultimately you always do notice that the client's sort of not as front and central as they can be on this platform. But pacing that has been incredibly important, because it's a lot of information to process, and for people with brain injury, the process is a lot longer. It's amazing that they can sit in front of their neuropsychologist or their neuropsychiatrist or their surgeon and ask those direct questions, or even their GP.
I've got a very a very young client at the moment, and I think, you know, it shows me how much we were slightly behind the times, because actually him having his rehab delivered virtually doesn't faze him in the slightest. You know, it's all of us who are catching up. He's already on all these platforms and well used to it. So
well, yeah, similarly I was quite concerned. I've got a 73-year-old client who I was a bit concerned the technology would be a bar to her accessing these virtual and remote therapies. But actually she's taken to it like a duck to water, and is now using FaceTime, and could probably show me a thing or two about what to do, and that's been something that her OT has really helped with, and her support worker and sister that she lives with. So it goes to show that you can't really discount anybody from being able to access these new technologies.
No, and as long as you're keeping people safe, and, you know, because we mustn't forget, you know, the environment in which they're in. I do think that, you know, it shouldn't be jumped into without having some due diligence done on the processes and some training in place.
absolutely, yeah.
Great. Well, there are certainly some really interesting observations there, and there's going to be some silver linings and some takeaways that will change practices into the longer term. Sonia, are you? What's your view on whether it's going to be possible for us to deliver this first-class rehab in this new world that we all now live in?
Well, I'll be totally honest. I've had some really very positive cases, and I think not just going forward post COVID. I've had a really positive case throughout the strictest lockdown. I've had one particular case of mine was a single mum with 2 teenage children that had to shield whilst with all the restrictions, and she'd been in an accident where she had a brain injury, multiple orthopedic injuries, and had recently just had knee surgery. She was having to go to a private wing of an NHS hospital for her physiotherapy, which was recommended that she couldn't have any other physio, it had to be there. So the hospital shut down, the gym shut down, everybody stopped going. She shielded. Now it's just like, this can't stop. We just can't stop. We need to maintain her. We need to maintain her. She's done such good progress. We can't let this go backwards. We've got loads of services going in. The services had to, so the cleaner wasn't going to go in. She didn't want anyone to go in. She couldn't clean a house. She was very house proud. And so it was just a case of, how can we keep it all going, because we didn't know how long it was going to last. She didn't have any family support. She didn't have a support worker, and it was just what I think was the underlying success to this case is that Unite Professionals as a company were so organised, and Joanne told me to say this, but Unite Professionals were so organised as a company to give us guidance, to give us the confidence, and to give us the training. In my previous career, I'd had a lot of back problems, and I've had times where I couldn't get out and about and do things. So I'd done a bit of remote working and things like that before, a lot of telephone assessments in previous jobs as an occupational therapist. And I just thought there just has to be a way around it. And I think the company looked into various different platforms and very quickly got risk assessments together. That because the guidance was so limited, and all the rehab professionals that my client had, they sort of didn't have, they were like, oh, well, I don't know what we can do. So what we arranged very quickly was, right, we're going to have a weekly conference call, and everybody go to your professional bodies, find out what's happening. If there isn't it there, try and find out what's going back. We need to keep this going. They were all working on shared goals, which was in a folder, all following sort of some quite detailed paperwork where they were all contributing to this and seeing what each other was doing, because it was all very intertwined, was all their therapy work. And I thought, we can't get into the folder, we can't get to see the client. So everybody went away, went to find out what systems they could use. And I was like, right, well, even if you just have a telephone call, first of all, with the client, do not cancel your appointments, try and keep your appointments. Different therapists one worked for a bigger company and was like an associate of theirs. Two of the other ones were independent. And they went away and did the homework. They came back and they told us, right, we can do this. I'm going to get access to this telehealth platform. We sort of checked out their platforms, checked out with the client that they were happy. And first of all, just sort of that first week, just touching base, keep the appointment, talk to the client, what they're going to do, what have you done so far? And then when we had our review call, it was right, we're working on a shopping goal, a dog walking goal, a mobility goal, you know, knee, neck, back, psychology, exposure work, all of these, how are we going to progress them? What can we do? And so the main goal might have had to change. So the priorities might have had to change, you know, so they all went back to the client and said, right, we're working on these goals. What are we going to do? What do you feel you can do? And how can you do it in your house? And they pretty much, I don't know if it was because they were 3 different therapists from 3 different backgrounds, organisations. They all felt that, and I suppose because I was pushing them all on a bit and sort of giving them the confidence and sort of giving them a bit of direction and expectations, you know. So next week when we come back on this call, let me know what you've done. And because they're working on shared goals, I think they all felt they had a commitment to each other, that they couldn't just sort of slack really, and that they had to do something. And that's what really seemed to, so every week it was almost like they were in a bit of a competition. Well, I've done that this week and I've done that this week. And they really, not only has this client maintained where she was at without the gym, without any hands-on therapy, she has had an ergonomic assessment with all her equipment delivered. Her OT worked with her on Zoom. They've done a virtual setup. They've altered all her equipment, so it's all perfect working height. She's studying for her new career that she's going into as a dog groomer. And
also I have to say that the insurer has been
marvellous.
He's been marvellous on this, because it's a joint referral, and a lot of it, not a lot, but a few insurers were sort of like, oh, you know what, how are we going to? And I think when you see the positivity of something like the delivery Sonia talking about, in terms of bringing the team together, being very clear about, we don't know what this will outcome, but actually, will you give us the funding, the increase, because it often doesn't cost less, it can cost more in terms of the intensity of hours. Maybe you lose travel and travel time, but actually you need to keep the momentum going, certainly early doors, and that self-direction for the client and the education. So he was a massive help in that, wasn't he, Sonia? Just everything you were asking for, he was like, there you go, really need to crack on.
But I also tried to tell him lots of what was going on. So I'm asking for this, but I'm only asking for this because, so for example, the cleaner stopped. The OT through Zoom and the physio assessed how she could do all her own cleaning. We got a long-handled equipment. She's doing all her own cleaning. We've done the same with gardening. So from having a gardener and a cleaner, she's independent now with those things. And so going shopping, so she was just going to go straight into going to the supermarket, but then because of the COVID-19, and this is what I mean, if we can, going forward, if we can do this when we're in lockdown, so her goals literally went from, we was like, right, she had a really old mobile phone, she didn't have a laptop. Well, now she's got a laptop, she's got a good mobile phone, she's learned to do online shopping, and so what's might happen, you know, so bits and bats, how she's progressed. So she's put her own shopping away, it's helped her cognitively, doing the shopping online. Then we progressed outdoor markets, right, let's get her to an outdoor market with the OT, socially distanced, and then let's get her to a late night shop. And so all these things are probably very different ways that we would have worked it, but we've tried to keep in line with, right, what's the government allowing us this week, right, let's get her moving on that. And we've gone to these calls every 2 weeks. We were going to go to them monthly, but then she started progressing so quickly and everything was happening so so fast that we've kept them at 2 weekly. But yeah,
I've got 200 risk assessments from
yeah, we do.
every time anything changes, we re-risk assess.
Yeah, but she's been
yeah.
But I mean, other things that one thing Joe touched on it briefly earlier, talking about how we're going to deliver first class rehab going forward. I really have no qualms whatsoever. There's only, out of all of my about 9 cases, there's only one case that I've had any concerns with therapy, and that's more been because it's been based in a setting where it decided to, you know, not offer that service anymore. And so it's a case of, there's so many other services out there that are offering it. I have really not had a problem finding services, and like Joe said, that services from further afield. So if you want a real specialist, that before you'd be like, oh, they're too far away, the travel costs. Actually, people are now saying, well, yeah, let's go remote. So you're getting better quality and quite often at a cheaper price. Which has been good. But I agree, a lot of stuff does need to be face to face.
Yeah.
So what do you think in particular does need to be face to face from your experience? What is it? Very subjective?
The hands-on therapy. I've had some assessments. I've had some vocational assessments where which have been quite good. They've got clients actually doing things, and they've been measuring on their computer screen with things like goniometers. You know what a goniometer is? I've actually got one in my little
looks at range of movement, so
it's like a protractor with 2 rulers on, and it moves around, and so you can put it on the screen looking at a joint. And so someone would have probably laughed at you if you'd have suggested that, you know, 5 months ago, but not now. And vocational specialists have sent things out. But so the ergonomic assessment that my OT did with the client I was talking about, that was done. But I've got one that I want to do with a client in a workplace. So out of 3 vocational assessments, I've got one in a specific workplace where I think that definitely needs to be done.
Yeah, I'm quite intrigued how you could do that as effectively remotely, because it just seems that you need to be within that space to assess it properly.
Yeah, and sometimes as well with a client who you don't feel you may be getting the honest truth, or you're just not quite sure, you know, sometimes you just need to be there.
Yeah, I've had other therapists kind of describe doing these remote assessments as like looking through a keyhole, or having blinkers on. You see what the client kind of allows you to see, but you can't assess their environment. You can't do a lot of the things that actually in person you would pick up on the body language. And
well, I'll just tell you there what I've done with my INA assessments. So my INA, I've done 4 INA assessments over the last couple of months, and I would say I've learned so much from doing them. And I absolutely disagree with the keyhole.
Yeah, I do.
I've seen some really quite fantastic things that when my clients have spoke. Well, I'll tell you how I used to do the INA is. I used to ring the client up, introduce myself, ask a couple of questions, and then basically go and see what I saw on the day, get them to show me a few things, do a lot of talking. I've seen, because generally they might have people there, they might be in one room, whereas I feel it's opened up the whole house, and much more tasks and better analysis of what they do. So generally what I've been doing on an INA, because Joe had done a few and then give some tips, and I've sort of got them doing more and more before the actual assessment. So whilst we've not been able to go out and see people to do the initial assessment at all, what I've done is I've rung up, I've done some initial screening, checking things out, talking through who we are, making sure they really understand that, because, you know, because when I want to speak to them on the INA call, I want them to be really clear and open about and understand who I am and what the purpose, you know, that I'm not there to, you know, make them really understand what my role is in the whole litigation rehabilitation process. So we get that out of the way, and I ask them a few things about their story, what happened and what we're going to go through. And then from there, I ask them for photographs of pretty much all their environment. I want to see the bed, the bathroom, the stairs, the inside, the outside, and then I want to see them doing these activities. So at first it started off with just an odd little, oh, show me how you step in and out of your back door and making a cup of tea. But I've kind of progressed them because and I've got them doing all kinds of things, going up and down stairs if it's safe for them to do that. Showing me different transfers, so showing me from the seat where they might sit that's a comfy chair but not easy to get out of, compared to how they get in and out of a dining chair, in the shoes on and off, the shirt on and off. It all depends what they tell me really their injuries are, so that when I'm actually on the video call, before I do the video call, I've already got all the medical records. Hopefully whatever they've got access to, they have generally sent me before the INA call. I've got photographs and videos of their properties and all their equipment, and I've also got videos of them doing activities and how they do it. And when you go to the house, there's so much to take in. You're taking in the environment, the medical, everything, the whole story, the accident. It's so hard to really get all that in your head to then come home and write about. But what I've got access to is actually photographs that I have while I write the assessment, and some videos that I can watch over again, that I can really then explain so much better when I'm writing my reports and how I've got that information.
And I think, Beth and Laura, what I would say as a supervisor and reading a lot of these INAs is I genuinely do not feel that they are compromised in any way, because we are front loading the preparation, as as Sonia says, in terms of having video evidence ahead, photos ahead, and then live streaming stuff when you take them around the house if you can, see some of the barriers to the house. The quality of the INAs genuinely have surprised me. And it's really good medical rationale for the recommendations. And I think that's a learning point going forward. I still don't think it substitutes a face-to-face for complex. And because you need to, we're human beings, we need that personal interrelationship.
Building the rapport, yeah. You
do. And I think you can gather some of that. It was really weird because we had some feedback from a case manager INA with a youngish chap who had lots of comorbidities, but also profound learning disability and a brain injury. And, his mum and even the case manager was a bit unsure of how it would work doing the assessment remotely. And after the assessment, the mum wrote to me in an email to say how exceptional she thought the process had been, because she had never seen her son come out of himself and express so much about his rehabilitation wishes as he had felt able to do on that platform. So, you can't automatically assume that things will be negative. And I think, Sonia, we've discussed, lots of your working practice you will take forward and you will select and have a richer form of.
So what do you think those takeaways are going to be in your practice going forward then? What are the kind of key things that you'll take forward, and even when face-to-face is going to be allowed and
back in,
you will be able to go and assess in the client's home environment. When do you think you would choose not to do that, Sonia, in your practice?
Well, I think the client likes to see you, but I think going forward, I will do all them, and if that's what the company policy is for me to do, and are happy for me to continue doing that, I would like clients, if they're happy to still send me their videos and their photos ahead of everything, because I can be so much more prepared. And if I can get half of the work done before I actually go and see the person, I'll have my assessment back much quicker. And another thing, sometimes if you need a really quick response and if you were limited and you were, if a solicitor was saying we really need to get this done by a certain time, I've had them done before where I might have had to go into a hospital environment, needs to be done before discharge. can't always get there before a certain time, and it might be that you know, I might not be able to travel that far on them days, but I might be able to do it in bits. And that's another thing that I actually didn't mention. When I do these INAs remotely, I do them in chunks. So I'll say to the person, right, you know, so they don't get exhausted, and then I'll say, right, shall we have an half an hour break? We'll come back, have a think about what we've already done, and have a think about, you know, we're going to talk about the goals next. So you go away and think about the goals, about what's most important to you, and I'll have a think about what I think, and we'll come back and we'll discuss that. And that's been helpful, because you don't do that in somebody's house. They might make you a cup of tea halfway through, but you think at home with a client that can't cope with you being there for 4 hours, because I can talk a lot, so I quite often am there for 4 hours.
it can be very intense, can't it? A very long process. Yeah,
it can to me. So it is, and if you've done a lot of that beforehand, you don't have to be there as long.
I think that's
a man for me.
It's really encouraging to hear how it is still possible, and it's been possible to adapt to the situation, even how quickly it happened, and all of us had to adapt, but that you've been able to overcome these challenges, and actually there are a lot of take-home points for all of us to learn and reflect on, and that there are flexible and innovative ways of working, even if we can't replace the face-to-face intervention 100%. So thank you both very much for speaking to us today. It's been really helpful, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for your questions. It's made us reflect again.